Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and our friends John Helmer and Ray McGovern are back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get started with the phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And here is what Witkoff said about it.
Sir, how different was this call?
I thought the call was epic. Jonathan, I thought it was epic, transformational. Those are the sorts of adjectives that I use about this call. The president and President Trump and President Putin were in sync with one another. The call was outcome oriented. They were talking about how to save lives, how to stop the carnage, and for me, I was proud to be an American sitting there listening to it.
So, how did you find it, John? Let's get started with you.
Well, first of all, Mr. Witkoff's probably an expert on leveraging real estate purchases, but he didn't listen to the call in any other respect with any other expertise, and he's exaggerating. First, it's important to say that all of us are very hopeful that President Trump can reach the kinds of agreements that would end the war that Russia has been obliged to fight to secure itself. So hopefulness is there. The performance, however, by President Trump on that side, and I'll come back to the President Putin on the other side, was surprising in the following ways. First of all, Trump seemed to be quite unprepared to hear the Russian positions, which have been repeated over and over and over again. In Trump language, who holds the cards? In that telephone call, Trump revealed he didn't have the cards. President Putin did. On the one hand, with respect to Kursk, where Trump has insisted on saving both the NATO forces and American forces that may be inside and the remaining Ukrainian forces, President Putin only offered surrender or die, which had been said before, but there was absolutely no movement in Trump's direction on that one. On the line of contact, there was no 30-day ceasefire. The agreement was that there should be a 30-day ceasefire of attacks on each other's energy infrastructure. But when Trump tried to describe later what that agreement was, a card player definitely has to remember the numbers on the cards. Trump couldn't remember. Trump's tweet, which came very unusually quite late after the talk, referred to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure. I'm reading from his words. That isn't what was agreed. It was a ceasefire on energy infrastructure, not energy and infrastructure. To get the words wrong in a tweet is indicative of Trump's carelessness. And if he claims to be holding all the cards, he couldn't remember that one. On the Black Sea, there was a discussion, but there was no agreement that the US and its allies would stop the kind of intelligence gathering over the Black Sea that targets Ukrainian attacks on Crimea along the contact line and on the hinterland. No agreement on the British operation to attack Russian naval vessels on the Black Sea. When Mr. Waltz got around to attempting to provide a readout on that, he misrepresented what had been agreed. So on the one hand, you have a reiteration by President Putin of the understanding that before you can have a ceasefire, the United States has to agree to stop supplying weapons and materiel and men to the front. President Putin explicitly referred to stopping the mobilization of Ukrainian manpower and women for the front. There was no agreement on those points, and no sign that Trump even was ready to answer on those points. If Mr. Witkoff was an advisor listening, his job as advisors, and both Ray and I have been in that sort of situation, is one of our jobs as advisors is to leave no surprise for the boss. Nothing should be surprising to him. We should have briefed him in detail on everything to expect, especially on a telephone call as important as this one. But Trump was unprepared. The second major discovery I think I've made, and I'd like to hear what Ray has to say, is the behavior of the White House immediately after the telephone call. I've never seen a situation in which the Russian side beat out the US side on public relations. Within minutes, RIA Novosti, the state news agency, had brought out and published a point-by-point summary of what had just been discussed and agreed. But the White House was incapable. It appeared to be that there was no coordination between the National Security Council and its advisor who managed this call, Mr. Waltz, the White House press office, the Trump tweet machine, and all the others. No coordination at all. There was a unique delay in Trump's ability to get something out on a tweet. It took him hours. Waltz's readout by tweet was incompetent. If I were in their situation, I would be very, very worried at this display of White House incompetence. What that reveals is something more serious, and this goes to the question of hopefulness for the future. The US has known this is coming. Both sides, the Russian side and the US side, agreed in Riyadh weeks ago to set up expert groups to do the detailed work that gets the agreements to the level where the presidents have to say, what do we differ here on? What can we agree on? Witkoff said he'd spent over the weekend 3 hours with President Putin and narrowed the differences. There are in fact no sign that Witkoff is capable of telling the truth or knowing what the differences are. There were no narrowing of differences. Rather, there was a display on the US side of a level of disorganization I've not seen before, which enabled the Russian side to capitalize, but still not trust what the US side is offering. And the trust was immediately broken by the significant Ukrainian drone attack on the Kazanskaya pumping station, another one of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium oil pumping stations in Krasnodar region shortly after. I'd like to hear what Ray has to say on the US side about the level of White House incompetence here.
My turn?
Go ahead, Ray.
Okay, yeah. Incompetence, nobody's going to argue that point with you. The president has surrounded himself with people who really have no real experience in this. And of course, Witkoff, advisor to the president, I would rather label him the implementation guy, the guy who hears from the president what to do and then does it. His second role is PR, and that's what you saw him doing in that clip. I'm not sure that it was transformational. I'm not sure it was in all those glowing terms, but I would have to differ with you, John, on trust. Trust is the major element that has been missing. The last time any voice of trust came from Putin was in a New York Times op-ed, 12 September 2013, after Putin had bailed Obama out on Syria. Putin had persuaded the Syrians to destroy all their chemical weapons under UN supervision on a special ship outfitted for that. Obama breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't have to go to war after all. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to start another war against Syria. And right when this was just going on, Putin wrote this op-ed for the New York Times, and he said, and I quote, "I am really gratified at the increasing trust that exists now, not only between our two countries, but between, personally, between the president and me." And they went on to say, the only thing I really disagree with Mr. Obama about is this business about people and governments and countries being exceptional. I don't agree with that. Mr. Obama said it just last week. I think all countries are equal. They're at different stages of development. Some have real problems, but I think when God looks down at all these people, he sees them as equal. Whoa, that was his last paragraph. What am I saying here? Well, trust was beginning, okay? And what did the neocons do? They saw that as a big danger. And 6 months later, you had the coup in Kiev. No more trust. After the coup, there was an agreement that was broken. The betrayals are legion, okay? The courts, the Minsk agreements and the one in Istanbul. So trust has evaporated. It got so that in my recent interviews, I have been saying, well, we can't say doverai no proverai anymore because the doverai trust is gone. You got to do some sort of like just agreement, and you don't need trust. You have to do an agreement that's eminently verifiable. Well, here I'm contradicted by no less than Dmitry Peskov, President Putin's spokesperson, who just said a couple hours ago, Putin and Trump trust each other, quote, trust each other. They want to put relations between the two countries back on track. There was, quote, solid will by the two presidents, end quote, to restore ties, and that the leaders, quote, understand each other very well. Whoa. Now, my God, that's going pretty far. So I'm much more hopeful here. The disorganization on the part of the White House, well, you have to expect that under Trump, but Trump's the man. And it seems to me what Peskov is saying is, okay, well, Trump has shown himself, and the Russian agreement starts out saying, we thank the president for trying to get this thing underway. And he also says that his efforts to achieve a noble goal of ending hostilities and human casualties, well, we thank the president for that. He also says, these prisoners in Kursk, yeah, it's a problem, but we're going to treat them in a humanitarian way in accordance with international law and Russian law. So he's trying to bend over backwards to show that he's trying to not to thumb his nose at President Trump, but trying to figure out, well, I got him surrounded. It's not good PR, among other things, to kill them all. They can be very useful as bargaining chip later. So again, I just see I don't see the thing in terms of a tectonic shift, but I see it more than just an inching forward. This meeting, what did it take, 2 hours, this telephone conversation? Today we just learned, of course, that Zelensky, okay, he said that's a good idea not to attack energy infrastructure. So, yeah, we'll go do that. So Zelensky has come around. Now, that too is big, because how are the Europeans going to be holier than Zelensky? I mean, Europeans are in shock, they don't know what to do. And their man is Zelensky, and Zelensky is now saying, okay, yeah, it's good. He called up Trump, apparently. He said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. That's a good start. So things are in flux, actually not in flux. Things are changing appreciably, in my view. And I cite Peskov, who does not say things idly. Speaking of trust that I thought would be a long time in building, he's talking about it already being there between Putin and Trump.
John, it seems that as we talk, a Ukrainian F-16 of American origin was just shot down in the skies over Sumy region. And it doesn't seem that the way that Donald Trump is trying to handle this situation would be that much influential as the Russian president or Russian officials were hoping that they're gonna get it from the Trump administration. John, do you see this? Donald Trump was talking about 24 hours to put, then 100 years, 100 days to put an end. But it seems that it's gonna get 100 years to get to
Well,
put an end to the conflict.
there may be a 100-year war between the West and Russia if you start in 1945. However, I entirely agree with Ray. The Russian side, Putin on down, and he does control his lower level experts, and they are more expert than those on the other side. The Russian position is to respect Trump, to give him the kind of grandstand he likes and needs especially, and to avoid any form of insult, any form of derogation, any form of cracking jokes at his expense. At the same time, what that means politically and tactically is to divide him from his underlings, from his subordinates, from those who can't follow orders. The shooting down, and I've also read it in the last couple of hours, the shooting down of the F-16 is the first. So there's a bounty which the Russian side has promised to pay the pilot or the field gunners who got it down. It's the first if it happened. When the bounty's paid, then I'll be sure. When I see the wreckage, I'll be sure. But more important is one other thing. It was a Russian Su-35 that shot it down. That's air combat for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, between a Sukhoi and an F-16, and the F-16 just lost, apparently on the basis of target data provided from an S-400 ground crew. Still, let's put it this way. We agree, Ray and I, that the top can resolve these problems if there's trust. The problem that we may also agree on is that Trump doesn't control too many levels downwards in his administration, and that the people he has, Waltz, Witkoff, Rubio, Ratcliffe, and Hegseth at Pentagon, aren't necessarily competent enough to deliver more than the kind of repetitive president of peace sloganeering that they think Trump needs. At the lower levels, the Russian side have to say, look at what's happening on the ground. I agree entirely with Ray. The Russian approach is not only to respect and reward Trump for what Trump needs to be rewarded for in public, but to divide not only Trump from his own staff who are disloyal or failing to implement the orders. Trump didn't ring up Starmer. Trump didn't ring up Macron. He didn't coordinate with the allies. It's a one-man, one-country show versus Russia. Whether Zelensky was taking orders when he launched the attack on Kazanskaya pumping stations, another matter. The Ukrainians claim that the Russians also violated the ceasefire on energy structure. This is a technical issue which can be resolved if there's trust, I agree. And if the top guy understands what's happening a couple of levels below him. What I go back to, however, is that the US promised to have the expert groups in place more than 3 weeks ago. There's no sign yet that the US side can agree between the agencies, between Pentagon, CIA, NSC, State Department, and what have you, on who should be there. And what's concerning to the Russian side is who would be in those expert groups, because many of them, Gorka, for example, under Waltz in the National Security Council, or Bono under Rubio at State Department, or Colby under Hegseth at Pentagon. These chaps want to fight Russia, want to go on fighting Russia. They're Russia war fighters still. Are they going to take, at the expert level, Trump's line, which Putin trusts from Trump? That's the issue. It's control down the line on the US side is not as it should be.
Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Question is whether Trump has enough in the way of loyalists to carry out his instructions. Now, when General Keith Kellogg was supposed to be his emissary to settle all this, I mean, he was canned, wasn't he? He was
Yes.
canned because he says really offensive things right off the bat in defending Zelensky. So he was put aside. Rubio was, I think, embarrassed by doing what he did. Saying, "Oh, let's have a ceasefire. What the 30-day ceasefire?" That shows just an amateurishness that shouldn't exist. But you know, the rubber has hit the road now. In this Russian readout, it says to the end of the leaders confirmed their intention to continue working toward a resolution of the Ukrainian conflict through bilateral channels. Whoa. So we're the big boys. We're taking over. Europeans, what are they? Oh, they could just cause trouble. We'll put them aside. Zelensky, well, until a few hours ago, I was prepared to say he's in the same category, but now he's come around. He called the president and said, yeah, it's a good idea to ceasefire. So there's movement there. But what they say here with the Russians, to this end, Russian and American expert groups are being established. Now, you're quite right, John, that they said that before. It takes a while to pick these people. And you're also right that they have to pick the right people, not the Kellogg's, but the people who will follow instructions like Witkoff, okay? But it can be done. And where there's a will, there's a way. And what Witkoff is saying is, yeah, there is a will. We'll find a way. And, the urgency here with which Trump attaches to all this stuff, and not the Russians so much, but I'm going to do this real soon in the Middle East and Italy. So, in other words, we have to keep remembering that Putin is under no pressure for a ceasefire of any kind, that he can cease bombing or missile attacks on energy infrastructure for 30 days. Well, that's pretty much par for the course. They only do it about every 30 days, for God's sake. That's the reality. So in reality, the conversation reflected the equities on the front. Russia is just about to finish this thing up. It can do what it wants to those Ukrainians left in Kursk, and also on the line there in that Donbass. And so he's got the big cards, says Putin does. And Trump is trying to make it appear really good and grandiose thing. All he could get was a 30-day ceasefire on these energy infrastructure. That's far short of what Rubio, who thought he got the Ukrainians doing. So it's in flux. It's going to be very messy, largely because of the factors you mentioned, John. These people are really neophytes. Some of them think that, this is what Trump probably want, that Rubio, and they do really stupid things. But in the end, if it is true, there's a growing trust, as Peskov says, between Trump and Putin. And if there's a will and there's a way, this thing can be wrapped up. It's not very difficult. It just will have to show that the Russians have won, however well disguised that is, so that Trump can say, well, we got this or that or the other thing, and persuade the American people this was not such a bad deal.
John, it seems that today Donald Trump talked with Zelensky, and right after that, the White House announced that the United States will continue sharing intelligence with Ukraine for defense purposes. Here is you talk about the Ukrainian attack, the drone attack on Russia, right after the talk between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Who's Zelensky? Who's running the show in Ukraine? Is that Zelensky? Is that these people we're calling them ultra nationalists, or it seems that who have the upper hand in Ukraine, or is someone else in Europe that is trying to run the show?
Well, I'm not here as an expert on the Ukraine. And what I understand, first of all, is if you pay attention to what Zelensky said during the day with the president of Finland, he said, we're ready to agree to the ceasefire on energy targets after the experts have met in the Middle East, meaning he's delaying his compliance and he's creating a lot of ambiguity, which began with ambiguity, at least on Trump's side, with the ill-worded tweet. It's not ambiguous on the Russian side. It never is when the bomb lands on you. So Zelensky's ambiguous as you would expect him to be, and you've described a factional fight within the Ukraine that I am not expert enough to describe. I can't even think any longer of who's expert enough to describe what's actually happening inside Zelensky's administration. But it creates pressures on Zelensky for his survival. It creates pressures on him to be ambiguous. And yes, you're right. The British are those masters of deception, not boots on the ground, but lies in the air. The British have their own factional stakes in the succession to Zelensky. Arguably, the British support General Zaluzhny, the current Ukrainian ambassador to London, to succeed Zelensky or to be more influential in the outcome of the peace negotiation. I don't know who the CIA would favor for a succession and what kinds of candidates there might be. There's the mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, who's not spoken of much as a candidate, at least in the Western press. It doesn't show to me that he's promoting himself or is being promoted in Washington as a successor. I think the US has had enough of Poroshenko. I think everybody's had enough of Poroshenko, former president, the failed president, the chocolate mogul, and the other Ukrainian candidates can be created as quickly as Zelensky was. So it's also unclear, if you look where the Ukrainian money is, what Ukrainian oligarchs are supported. We've just recently seen that Elon Musk attacked Ukrainian oligarchs who live in Monaco. In Monaco, he was referring to Viktor Pinchuk. Viktor Pinchuk is a significant Ukrainian oligarch who stole a great deal of money from an insurance company he had in Russia and spent some of that money bribing the Clinton family. It's arguably the reason for the hostility of the Trump side towards Pinchuk, that he was so close to the Clinton family and he funded Brookings institutions, Ukrainian professors and whatnot. Pinchuk remains a significant force, but he's always been a significant advocate in Kiev for Ukrainian adhesion to the European Union, to NATO. Who supports him, who doesn't support him, who supports Rinat Akhmetov, the electricity and mining oligarch, I don't know. And they aren't making too many statements to indicate which side of the succession, which side of the Atlantic they're on. So I think it would be futile for me to add anything there. Ray, do you have a view about what side the future of leadership should be in Ukraine and who supports it?
Well, I'll make some guesses. I think that Zelensky has a second lease on life now. Otherwise, he wouldn't be calling and sort of telling the president of the United States, hey, this is a good idea. Yeah, we'll work with this and all that stuff. So somebody told Zelensky that this is your only option, and he's playing that role. Now, these somebodies in the back room that are controlling or heavily influencing Zelensky, they have lots at stake here. A lot of them are close to Nazis, okay? Some of them are proto-Nazis, if you will. And of course, the Russian aim was pronounced very early on the first day of the special military operation, demilitarization. That means killing off the Ukrainian army, and denazification, making sure that the Nazis are no longer running the show in Kiev. Now, my thought is that it's going to come to the situation where maybe the military in Ukraine will do a little coup. Okay, they'll have some support from extraneous forces, but if they get a guy who's willing to clean out the Nazis, then the U.S. and UK, the people who pull the strings here, might pick a person like Zelensky. Only problem with Zelensky is he's known to have been in thick and thin with the Nazis. So there have to be it's a pretty sordid list of dramatis personae, isn't it? I mean, my God, the ones you just listed, John. So can they find some? Of course they can find somebody. But I think the military is probably going to move first. Why? Because there's not going to be any military to command in just a few weeks. Why? Because they have a legitimate grievance here. Most Ukrainians, according to the most recent polls, are against continuing the war. Okay, that's new. It's not 70% yet, but it's more than 50%. I think an enterprising general who has the right contacts with people who have money can easily kind of come in there and say, okay, Zelensky, go to your Riviera yacht and take your security people with you. You're finished. You have a nice life. Take care. I think that's going to happen. How soon it happens? Well, Zelensky is trying to make sure it doesn't happen real soon, but I think it's inevitable.
A couple of things, and Ray and I agree with all that Ray's just said. A couple of things that may not be so familiar to the audience that are worth pointing out that President Putin has said. Before the telephone call in the meeting with Russian businessmen, President Putin was in no hurry to get to the call. He was very confident that day, and he looked fresh. He has looked tired recently. He wasn't at that session. In the private discussions with the businessmen, it's been reported in Moscow this morning that Putin said that Russia might make no claim on Odessa as a Russian city if the settlement went quickly. I don't know what exactly he said in Russian, but the offer was we do this quickly at Vitkov speed, let's say, and I'll let Odessa dangle as a Ukrainian city. We've talked about this before. The reason is that the Odessans won't dangle for too long. They will go where the money is in the final analysis, and they may simply take themselves into Russia later, the weaker the regime is in Kiev. The second thing and that's a significant offer on the table for the US side to hurry up, form the expert groups, and agree on what Ray's just said, what we've said before, on a demilitarized zone that's enforceable and not by British boots on the ground, not by French boots on the ground, many of which are being killed at the moment. A demilitarized zone and a change of regime that doesn't have a fascist, Russia-hating, Slav-hating, Jew-hating, Pole-hating mental character, which they inherited from their grandfathers, and their grandfathers before their grandfathers too. What Putin also said was end the mobilization in the Ukraine. Now that's very significant because the mobilization is extremely unpopular, as it would be, is everywhere. During the Vietnam War, all Americans remember being unpleasantly upset about being drafted. Okay, everybody, no one likes to fight, especially with your chances of survival in the Ukraine. When President Putin tabled with Trump in the call an end to mobilization, that's a real challenge to the balance of power between the Zelensky civilians, the Budanov Secret Service men, and the British, let's say, on the one hand, and the military who want to stay alive and have a military to command later. We're hearing that Zelensky wants to fire Syrskyi, the current general, Zaluzhny's successor. What would really end, pardon me, the war for the army is the end of mobilization. Would be very popular, but it pits civilians against the military. And I'm not sure what part of the military command in the Ukraine wants a mobilization of women and children. And there was an attack on a women's unit on the front in the last 24 hours by the Russian side, and apparently with significant casualties. So an offer, you can keep Odessa, but you can't keep mobilization, is a very significant attempt on the Russian side to divide and rule the succession to Zelensky. And it should be understood that way.
Yeah, good point, John. And Nima, you will remember me mentioning this a couple of times in the past. Odessa. Odessa, of course, founded by Catherine the Great, a beautiful, beautiful Russian city. Putin was asked about Odessa at the end of October 2023. It came at the end of one of these marathon question and answer periods. There was a correspondent who said, "Mr. President Putin, I'm planning on going on a trip, and I'd like to visit Odessa. Should I apply for a Ukrainian or a Russian visa?" Clearly a set-up question, right? Well, Putin waxes eloquent about what a beautiful city it has been, how it's deteriorating now. But he said, Odessa could be a яблоко раздора, an apple of discord. Go back to the Trojan War, for God's sake, an apple of discord. Or it could be a way to get together and jointly work out these problems. My God, And he went on in that vein. Now, nobody noticed, nobody probably read the rest of his Q&A because it was very long. That's what Russian specialists don't bother to do these days in the United States, at least. I'm sure John noticed that. I noticed it, and I'm saying, look, Odessa is key if Ukraine is going to be more than just a farm for the rest of Europe, okay? It needs to have access to the sea. Odessa is that, okay? So would the Russians be willing to say, well, let's rule Odessa together. Let's impose a kind of a multinational sort of regime where you could still exist as a separate country, and you don't have to just fold your tent like an Arab. I think there would be. There's lots for both sides on that one. Odessa also is the scene of terrible massacre of people who are protesting against the coup that we instituted in February of 2014. It was May 2nd. About 48 people were burned alive or jumped to their death or were shot in the trade unions building. These were people attacked by rightist thugs of the kind that not even Zelensky can control. So there's a history there, but I would say that since Putin himself has said it could be a яблоко раздора, an apple of discord, or it could be a way of working these things out together, I think it's up for grabs. If I were with the Russian army, would I want to take Odessa? I don't think so. I wouldn't even want to try to take Kharkiv. You can work things out short of obliterating cities, and the Russians are cautious and they have the upper hand. So I see that as one area where there could be a compromise, and that Trump could brag about, oh, look, I saved Odessa. And, Trump can also brag about this. He could say, American people, I have persuaded my friend Vlad not to attack Poland. not to take over the Baltic states. I have persuaded him not even to take over all of Ukraine. Odessa, we're agreed to blah, 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 blah. Well, now, you and I would sort of laugh at that, right? Because we know that Putin had no intention of doing that in the first place. But Biden told people, Blinken and Sullivan told people, and most Americans believe that. BS, okay? So in the PR sense, those are about the strongest cards that Trump has, and they all have to do with this dilatory, incapable administration that preceded him. And so I think he will trade on those cards. Those are the only ones he really has. And I think Putin is willing to deal with them. And I am really shocked that his spokesman is talking today about trust, and each one trying to drive toward peace there, and sort of realizing that they're together on this, that they'll do it together, by two, and that experts will convene. And I think Trump has said often, right quick, they're going to convene, not in Europe, not in Helsinki, not in Geneva, not in Europe. They'll convene in the Middle East, probably in Saudi Arabia, and they'll deal with it. Meanwhile, the Russian army is attriting. New word for me in English, okay? And the real question is what happens to those people in Kursk, because they're out of supplies now. How humanitarian will Putin want to appear? I think he'll want to appear as humanitarian as possible, all within the constraints of international law and Russian federal law, which have severe penalties for killing women and children, and really attribute that to terrorism, not war.
John, Donald Trump, before talking with Vladimir Putin, said he's going to bring up this case of the nuclear power plant. Do we know if they talk about it, and what Donald Trump wants from that case?
Good question, Nima. I've seen all the press reports. I especially since the telephone call, we're looking at Trump getting on a slightly small, not a grandstand, maybe a soapbox on the issue of whether the US could take over Ukrainian power plants. That is to say, the power plants that are still working, in order to safeguard them. On the one hand, Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is now within Russia. That's not going to be a US-controlled facility. Second, the US influence on the International Atomic Energy Agency as the inspectorate for nuclear safety is about as perverse and insidious and perfidious as the US influence over the protection of the world from chemical warfare. The destruction of OPCW by the US and the British following the Novichok case is a point that has to be raised. US control of power plants can be anti-Russian. So were the US to take over, as USAID was taking over, to repair the nuclear power plants that no longer operate at normal capacity in the west of the Ukraine, that might be something to be negotiated. But Zaporozhye cannot be negotiated as a US property on Russian territory. I doubt that. As a goodwill gesture to prevent the Ukrainians using their own artillery and rocket attacks on nuclear power plants to release nuclear radiation, that would be a good idea. That would be acceptable on the Russian side. Indeed, it would be a peacemaking idea to prevent the Ukrainians from developing dirty nuclear weapons, which the British Defense Secretary in a previous administration seemed to be endorsing. If the US wants to control that kind of Ukrainian military mentality, that would be a good idea. That would be a peacemaking offer too. Obviously, the devil is in the details of what was said. Would it mean for example, that within a demilitarized zone, the US would take inspectorate responsibility for the safety of nuclear facilities within the demilitarized zone, that would be negotiable. I mean, Ray and I could work this stuff out. It's technical, but it requires first a boss who understands what's happening. Second, two bosses who trust each other, and third, a line of command and control, so that when the boss says something, other troops salute and do what they're told. All of these things are possible, yes. That they're on the table now after years of Ukrainian attacks on nuclear plants, as well as the attempt in Kursk to get at the Kursk nuclear plant. This is all positive. I don't think I can say more on that.
Right.
I think your hypotheticals are right on the mark, John. I think this is so far in the future. I see it as a grandiose gesture, like we're going to take over and own Gaza as well, and after we get finished building Gaza up, then we're going to, I don't see much reality to it for all the circumstances that would require agreement by everybody concerned. What bothers me is a false flag. What bothers me is some crazy Ukrainian is going to fire a missile, not at Zaporozhye, which is pretty much well defended now, but at some other nuclear power plant, and blame it on the Russians, and then all hell will break loose. Some of those power plants are not adequately protected from things like missile attacks. Last reports I've seen, it would be worse than Chernobyl if just one of those, was damaged to the point where radioactivity escaped. So the general concept of being in better control of these things is a really good one. How it would work out in practice, I think that it's good to call attention to all this. Zaporozhye is the biggest in Europe, actually. That's taken care of, I assume, unless there's a saboteur or something. The other ones, we ought to be looking at them very carefully, not least because some crazy Ukrainians might be inclined to blow one of them up, and that would create a whole new situation in the middle of Europe.
Yeah. Just shifting the gear to what has happened in the Middle East, Donald Trump attacking Yemenis. The same policy, this policy was in place since, I don't know, we can say a decade with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain. They were fighting Yemenis, and the Biden administration has chosen to fight Yemenis, which didn't end well after all. Here is what Tulsi Gabbard said when you compare Tulsi Gabbard before coming to power and right now. Here is what she's talking about, Ray.
Yemeni people who are on the brink of death from famine, disease, lack of access to food and water, basic medicine and health care. Thousands of Yemeni civilians have died in this genocidal war being waged by Saudi Arabia with support from the United States.
It's absolutely outrageous that the United States has continued its support for years now for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen that has killed thousands and thousands of innocent Yemeni people and caused mass starvation and suffering, a cholera epidemic, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world in Yemen.
Congress finally passed legislation to end U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen. Now this bill is sitting on President Trump's desk, awaiting his signature or veto. Now, he's already threatened to veto this bill, which just reveals how he cares more about what Saudi Arabia wants than what the American people want. You saw Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail about Saudi Arabia, against United States support for Saudi Arabia, calling them out for what they are, and now refusing to end U.S. military support for this genocidal war in Yemen that Saudi Arabia is waging, that's created the worst humanitarian crisis of our generation, because he says, well, he doesn't want to risk a multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Saudi Arabia. So, you can see, at least in that respect, what he's really motivated by. He would rather continue to support the senseless and devastating deaths of innocent people in Yemen and using our U.S. military, my brothers and sisters in the military, to do that because he doesn't want to risk an arms deal with Saudi Arabia, a theocratic dictatorship that actually directly supports terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. Trump's leadership, going back through his first term as president, he has been and remains very committed to combating and defeating the threat of Islamist terrorism that not only affects the United States, the American people, our own safety and security, but it is affecting so many people in different parts of the world. We can see different terrorist groups, the Houthis in Yemen being one of them, that President Trump has redesignated after President Biden took them off of the terrorist list, redesignated them appropriately as a terrorist organization, and taking action where the previous administration failed to.
Right.
The Houthis have been disrupting maritime trade and passage for a very long time, and no serious effort has been taken to stop that disruption. Our country and other countries should not be in a position to have to make a decision to reroute commerce going through that area simply because of the Houthi threat that exists. So President Trump has taken decisive action for our own safety, security, and prosperity. And I know we'll look to other affected countries, as there are many who are impacted by this, to similarly take action.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ray. Your take.
Oh, oh, Nima. Well, let me say this, that it has to do with starving people, right? It has to do with genocide. But I guess when you get appointed to a new position, you take the side of the genociders and the people who enforce the starvation. Let's back up and ask the Houthis what they're doing, as my good friend Max Blumenthal did about 2 weeks ago when he talked to the number 2 in the Houthis, in Ansar al-Sam, okay? And he said, why are you doing this? Why are you blockading the Red Sea? And he said, well, because we're supporting Palestine, and we have a lull now, but we don't want the Palestinians to be genocided against, okay? He said, yeah, well, what's in it for you? Said back, I told you, this is a solidarity thing. It's a matter of principle. We're not going to let the Israelis genocide our friends, the Palestinians. You know what I'm saying? Oh, what do you get out of it? We get out of it bombing by UK, by the US, but that's okay. This is a matter of, you understand what a matter of principle is? No. The Houthis, of course, have paused their blockade of the Red Sea as long as the Israelis promised to deliver trucks so that people would starve to death. And the Israelis said, oh, no, we won't do the trucks so people don't starve to death. So the Yemenis said, well, we reimpose this blockade. I mean, what do they get out of it? This is the kind of solidarity that the rest of the Arabs are not showing. Even, nobody, the Turks talk a big game, the Iranians do. But, I think that the Houthi example here, I think could be contagious, especially now that the genocide part 2 has just begun yesterday. I think it may be so embarrassing to these Arab monarchs and other leaders that they'll have to say, well, the Houthis are the Houthis are right. We're going to have to do what we can to prevent a whole people, 2.3 million of them, from being killed, expelled, perished to death by disease or starvation, and we're going to stop that. So that's the Houthis for you. Now, to see Tulsi Gabbard arguing this other case, she shouldn't be so pliable here. And particularly as head of intelligence, she should avoid making policy pronouncements or prescriptions. Her credibility has just gone down 5 notches, in my view, if she's going to be promoting policies that she must know if she has good experts are of dubious justice, not only dubious effectiveness.
John.
Well, I'll come back to Tulsi Gabbard in a minute, but let me talk to the Arab issues. I think a long time ago was another life ago. I was an advisor to the Secretary General of the Arab League when it was in Tunis. And I've written a book with my late wife called The Jackal's Wedding on the program of elimination, wiping out all the Arab national leaderships since 1943. The Yemenis remain the only ones left. And what President Trump and the Pentagon have done was what President Reagan attempted to do in 1986, assassinate with bombing raids from the air. What happened in 86, a policy of murdering Gaddafi and eliminating Libya as a national Arab leadership force, began with President Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Those two hatched the plan to get rid of Gaddafi by murder. The Reagan administration picked it up, and in the end, they launched a bombing raid on Tripoli, which was intended to kill Gaddafi in the Babazia camp where he lived in Tripoli. It failed. It had US spotters on the ground. Journalists were used, US journalists were used to spot that particular bombing raid. And I think that it's highly likely that some of the special ops intelligence assets that Gabbard controls, or can at least read now, were used on the ground to identify where the Ansar Allah or Houthi leadership were living. All I can gather is that the Pentagon briefer, General Grinkevich, who gave a briefing, an Air Force general gave a briefing, I'm looking at my paper to get the date right, March 18, indicated that human targeting was one of the objectives of these raids. And that's why residential areas were struck. It was an attempt on the US side to duplicate what the Israelis attempted against the Hezbollah leadership in Beirut. The Israelis were successful. They wiped out the Hezbollah leadership of the time. It appears the US has not been successful. I can't see, as I said many, many years ago, in another world, I had access to all sorts of Arab sources and plenty of ability to understand what was happening. All of that's gone. So I'm speaking from the dark and out of the past now. But essentially what the US is trying to do is to assassinate Ansar Allah, decapitate it like the Israelis did to Hezbollah, like the Israelis continue to do to Hamas. Why Yemen? Because it's the last of the Arab nationalist forces still fighting for the principles of Arab nationalism, which include the solidarity with the Palestinians, but it also is a self-defense. So I think this partly answers your question. It's not new. It's a continuation of a discreditable policy that has now, the Israelis have perfected it, a genocidal element. We will not only kill the leadership, we will kill all the people. That's relatively new, and that's, let's call that an Israeli invention. But the old idea of destroying secular Arab nationalism is not new. Trump has adopted it, and Gabbard is now defending it. The Gabbard's performance in India, where she was over the weekend, was another display of she again referred to Trump, the peacemaker, every 15 seconds or so, as Rubio and Waltz had done in Riyadh. It is, as Ray said, a display of loyalty to the boss, of a kind that you only see in countries run by personality cults. It's not the performance of the senior intelligence officer in the United States. It's the performance of a lackey in a personality cult. That Gabbard should use her office now to describe the Yemeni resistance as terrorist in order to justify murdering their leadership and all the collateral damage, is a moral disgrace for her. It's a discreditable display of Trump policy, where in the use of force to pursue a very old U.S. policy. Just to indicate what I read in this first Pentagon briefing of the Trump administration, and I see if I can find it on my screen. I'm having trouble remembering everything these days. No, I can't. Here we go. Sean Parnell, the new Pentagon spokesman, and General Grinkevich basically said it's moral for us to win. To win. He didn't say I would have thought the morality is we should win the moral end. No. Their idea is moral for us to win as quickly and as decisively as we can. This was said in defense of the Yemen attacks. The morality of destroying another country's leadership is a moral principle of the Pentagon in the Trump administration. That's what's going on. It's not new, it's discreditable. And from an Israeli-American point of view, it has succeeded. Only this time, the Yemenis have survived, one, and two, they have inflicted a level of damage on the Israeli economy and on the world economy, which is unprecedented for an Arab force since the beginning of the Arab states after World War II. Unprecedented capability to inflict long-term economic damage on the Israelis. And long war against Israel is the war that will destroy, from an Arab point of view, Israel. Long war is a war that the Israeli economy, the Israeli isolation, the smallness of Israel cannot survive, not even with US help.
Ray, go ahead. Ray.
Yeah, Nima, I would step back a second and say we have a Jekyll and Hyde president. Okay. What's happening in Europe, when you think that just 4 or 5 months ago, I particularly was worried that we may end up in a nuclear confrontation with Russia, that has changed. That's good. Things are bringing peace in that part of Europe, and it's going to not explode or escalate out of control. Now, the bad part of this, of course, is Trump acting as he is, not only facilitating, not only being pre-informed, not only arming, but justifying genocide. Do not blanch before the word. Now, what the Houthis are doing is fighting against genocide, and what the U.S. is doing with the airstrikes is an arm of Israel, okay? Pure and simple. It's acting on behalf of joining the war that Israel is trying to inflict on all the Arabs, especially the Palestinians, okay? That's big. Now, just to kind of give you a particular, I come from the part of New York where say, give me a for instance. Well, here's a for instance, okay? Tulsi Gabbard had picked a lieutenant colonel retired named Danny Davis to be her deputy. As soon as the Israel lobby found out about it, they descended on all the people who picked this person and on Congress, and had all kinds of bad publicity saying he could possibly he couldn't possibly be the deputy because he's objective about Israel, or he said things that could be read as not being fully supportive of Israel, okay? And so guess what? He was canceled just before he was about to sit down in his chair, okay? Did that happen before? Yes, it did. You've had Chaz Freeman on. What people mostly forget is that when Admiral Blair was the director of national intelligence in 2009, okay, and he wanted to repair the situation in intelligence so there wouldn't be another attack on Iraq or Iran or some other place, like he picked Chaz Freeman. to run the national intelligence estimates, the president's daily brief, the head of all the analysis of the entire intelligence community. Okay. And guess how long Chaz Freeman remained in that position? 5 hours. He took his seat. He was duly. He didn't require Senate confirmation. This is really intrusive, huh? He sat down in 5 hours. The Israel lobby went to Obama at the time. No, we can't have this guy. He's too. Well, he's been in Saudi Arabia. He knows too much about it. So they canned them. So all I'm saying is, look, as far as Ukraine is concerned, our president is showing some smarts, and he's working toward a peaceful outcome. Less people are going to be killed on Israel, Gaza, Yemen, and places like that. He is just completely part of the Israel enterprise here. I can't explain it myself, but I've seen it for my whole career. I don't really understand it, but it's a disgrace, and it's a violation of what George Washington, our first president, for God's sake, argued about. He said, "Look, no special consideration for other countries whose interests do not necessarily correspond with our own. No passionate attachment," is what he said, "for the interests of other people." He was talking about France then, where he goes for the Israelis in spades. So it's very, very hard to kind of say, well, I compartment Trump and say, okay, he's doing okay here, but over here, it's a disgrace. And I, as an American, am ashamed to be enabling genocide. I was alive for the first one, okay? I was very little, but I was arrived there for World War II, the whole thing, and I knew what happened to the Jews. Now, are 2.3 million people killed? Is that less than 6 million people killed? Well, it's different because we're enabling it, for God's sake. We're arming it, and we're permitting it and condoning it. That's different. We have to rise up and do something about this so that Trump knows that we're not going to slavishly bend to whatever he thinks he's doing.
John, here is what Donald Trump tweeted in 2019, October 2019. In his tweet, he says that the United States has spent $8 trillion fighting and policing in the Middle East. And he ends up with, going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made. And when you look at the situation right now and the way he's talking about maybe a new war, a new fight between the United States and Iran, do you see that happening? Do you see that coming with the attitude of the Trump administration?
Well, it's coming, all right, because it's being threatened. Second, I don't disagree with what Ray said, but in the Jackal's Wedding book, I tried to argue that a slightly different view about how the United States strategy has evolved in the Middle East. Yes, operationally, the Israel lobby attacks anyone like Daniel Davis or Charles Freeman, or many, and Ray will remember them, any CIA analyst that was spotted by the Israel lobby, which might have been occupying the desk next to this chap. Any CIA analyst who was seen to be too pro-Arab was removed or had their wife's job threatened. I mean, all of us who've been in that part of politics in Washington know how the Israel lobby works. On the other hand, it's been my view, and it's the story of the Jackal's Wedding, that it's also been US policy to subjugate all Arab national threats to what the US perceived to be its national interests in the Middle East. The story in Libya had to do with Wheelers Air Force Base and the nuclear targeting plans that Curtis LeMay had after the war aimed at the Soviet Union. The US view about how to partition and break up Syria back in the 40s, not so different from the way the US is behaving along with the Turks and the Israelis in Syria now. We could go country by country, and that's what the Jackal's Wedding book did. Israel is an actor that can manipulate the presidency and conduct purges all the way down the line in Washington. At the same time, there is been a fundamental strategic U.S. interest in controlling the Middle East, first for oil and now for much more. So to the extent that that policy has succeeded, to the extent that Israel has succeeded in wiping out Arab nationalism, and finally in the last few weeks destroyed Syria, now partitioned into a Turkish zone, an American zone, an Israeli zone. I didn't say Arab zone. Syria is no longer Arab. To the extent that all of these wars against the Arabs have succeeded is both a US policy and an Israeli policy. And Trump's tweet is as ignorant as it could possibly be. Therefore, what's left is Iran as a major power capable of attacking Israel and destroying Israel militarily, but will not. Iran is capable of supporting its proxy forces in Iraq and in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Gaza, and so forth. And it has supported the Houthis. Iran remains an obvious US and Israeli target. So I think I'm saying the obvious. The US side has said the obvious. The Israeli side said the obvious. Iran's the next target because it's the last target. The Houthis are small. They've inflicted extraordinary damage beyond their firepower. And they've done it very intelligently, and not because they're Iranian stooges. They're Arab nationalists.
Right.
But one has to say, they looked at the fate of Gaddafi, who was eventually murdered, as we all know, by a NATO force, the US having failed to kill him before. Gaddafi was small, but more powerful than the Houthis and Libya. Look where Libya is now. Look where Gaddafi is now. The Houthis are the last outpost of Arab nationalism that's sovereign on their territory, because the Palestinians are not sovereign in Gaza, subject to genocide, and they're not sovereign on the West Bank, subject to all the pressures underway. So the US side, like the Israeli side, will see the Houthis as a terrorist outcome of Iranian control. So Iran is the last target, but Iran's not Arab. It's the last target for a US policy that has used Israel, and Israel uses the United States. That's how I see it. It's two hands around the same throat.
Yeah. Ray, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll just add that Tulsi Gabbard, if she's worth her salt, should commission a national intelligence estimate on whether Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. Such was done in 2007, and it was arranged, actually moderated by an honest intelligence professional. And the result was unanimous agreement under all 16 intelligence agencies that Iran had stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and had not resumed work. Now, that judgment, unanimous, expressed with high confidence, was reiterated every year since. So if Tulsi Gabbard wants to do the kind of job that was done in 2007 and prevent a war that would be far worse than Iraq, then she needs to just have her experts, honest ones, say, are the Iranians working on a nuclear weapon? They've, as recently as last year at this time, the intelligence community said, no, they're not. So if all of a sudden people like John Bolton and others are saying, oh, now we know they are, watch out, folks. and make sure you kick the tires of any statement that comes out to make sure that it's reasonable. I would say one more thing about being criticized as anti-Semitic. John, if you're going to Britain or any, or Germany, you got to be real careful these days. They're going to, detain you at the airport for saying untidy things about the Israelis. Back in 2005, when it became very clear why the Iraq attack by the U.S. and UK happened, I devised a little acronym, OIL, O-I-L, O for oil, I for Israel, L for logistics, the permanent military bases we coveted there in Iraq. And lo and behold, proof came that this was all a charade, there was all a deception, that the intelligence was being twisted to justify the policy. Documentary evidence of that. John knows what I'm talking about. And so there was a hearing in Congress. John Conyers called a hearing, and I was one of the people to testify. And after we got finished about everybody saying, well, what it was not about, the attack on Iraq, one of the congressmen says, now, can somebody tell me what it was about? Who was behind all this? It's like, well, I can. Okay. Oil, O-I-L, oil, Israel, and logistics. Whoa, I said Israel. All of these representatives, these congressmen, they're all Democrats. Oh my God, what happened? Well, I was called anti-Semitic, and so was John Conyers the next day in the Washington Post because I said Israel. Now, bottom line here is that I used to attribute about 1/3 of the responsibility to each of these factors. Now it's at least 1/2 Israel, because I know a lot more about how this thing was waged and who was influencing this in the Defense Department and elsewhere. It was the Israelis who played a major role in getting us to attack Iraq and getting us to attack Syria and getting us to attack all kinds of things. So the influence is pernicious. I don't care if people call me anti-Semitic. I'm anti-Zionist. That's a political movement that is just trouble. I'm not anti-Semitic. I don't have to say that because I just am not. But if I went to Britain and said these things, they might even put me in jail or, arrest me. So, we still have some freedom of speech here. It's disappearing quickly, but as long as I can say these things, what have I got to lose? Thanks.
Thank you so much, John and Ray, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Most welcome.